ng Diyos. Maraming salamat po sa buhay at lakas na aming taglay, sa liwanag ng kaisipan at sa pagkakataong maipagpatuloy ang pag-aaral ng mga kabataan. Gabayan po ang bawat isa sa amin. Anuman ang bahagi na aming gagampanan, naway maging maayos at matagumpay ang pagtuturo at pag-aaral na aming gagawin sa araw na ito. Patawarin mo po kami sa aming mga pagkulang at pagkakasala. At sa aming paggawa, ikaw po ang aming makasama. Amen.
A pleasant day to you, grade 12 students. This is the 10th learning session on 21st century literature from the Philippines and from the world. I am your live stream teacher, Sir Jasper, joining you in the next hour in exploring the various treasures of contemporary literature. Let me once again remind you to get your learning packet, pen, and notebook. Don't forget to jot down notes during the live stream session. In the previous meeting, you have been introduced to the various contexts that we may consider to better understand, analyze, and interpret the text we read. In today's discussion, we aim to concretize our understanding of concepts by applying what we have learned to the two contemporary literary pieces from the world. But before that, I have prepared an activity for you. I will be showing some pictures, and your task is to give words that best describe or represent the concept showed by the pictures. Let's begin. Alright, what do we have here? Let's see the next picture. Now, can you tell me what words can be used to represent the concept or activity in the picture? Write your answers on the comment box. I'll give you 10 seconds to do that. Timer starts now. Come on, write your answers. Alright, time is up. Let's see if your answers are the same as mine. Did you write the words protests, riots? How about turmoil? How about revolts? Alright. Among the many words you have written on the comment box, however, we shall be defining the word uprising. What do we mean by the word uprising? Uprising is a localized act of popular violence in defiance usually of an established government. Have we Filipinos experienced uprising before? Of course. Who would forget the two people power revolutions that ousted two of our presidents who were involved in certain issues that made the people do action? Let us have the next picture. This time we have a GIF. What word represents what you can see on the GIF? Comment your answers on the comment box. I'll give you 10 seconds to do that. Go ahead. Alright, what were your answers? What words have you thought of? Maybe you have thought of the words conflict and war. But did you know that there are several kinds of war? The most famous in the contemporary setting, however, is perhaps the Civil War. War between countries has ceased to occur because nowadays we value diplomacy more than violent ways of resolutions. But before we look at civil wars, let's define what we mean by the word war. Class war is an intense armed conflict between states, governments, societies, or parliamentary or paramilitary groups such as mercenaries, insurgents, and militias. It is not only a conflict, it is a conflict that involves the use of firearms. While war is generally a conflict between two sides, in a civil war, the armed conflict is between two groups of people in a certain country. Also known as an interstate war, a civil war is a form of armed conflict between organized groups within the same country or state. What do you think happens to the citizens of a certain country facing a civil war or, let's say, a very violent uprising? Well, you may think that some of them remain in the country, while others, like the family of Amir in the Kite Runner, flees to another country. What do we call these people who are forced to flee or to go to another country where they can be safe? Look at the next picture. Class, looking at these pictures, what do you think are the words that best represent what we're shown? Again, I'll give you 10 seconds to think and to write your answer on the comment box. Who are these people? What do we call them? Okay, go ahead. Okay, let's see if we have the same answers. Did you answer refugees, outsiders, or immigrants? By the way, how is a refugee different from an immigrant? And how do migrants differ from immigrants? Grade 12, can you match the correct term to its correct definition? Let's read the following definitions. Number one, a person who comes to live permanently in a foreign country. Number two, a person who has been forced to leave their country in order to escape war, persecution, or natural disaster. And number three, a person who moves from one place to another, especially in order to find work or better living conditions. What do you think is the correct term for the first definition? Refugee, migrant, or immigrant? Comment your answers. How about the correct term for the second definition? Who is meant by this definition, the second one? How about the last definition? What is the correct term for the last definition? Again, let me give you 10 seconds to think about that. Go ahead. Let's see if your answers are correct. Alright, an immigrant class is a person who comes to live permanently in a foreign country. If you have a relative abroad who stays there for a long time and has the right to stay for such time, then that relative of yours may be an immigrant. A refugee, on the other hand, is a person who has been forced to leave their country in order to escape war, persecution, or natural disaster. The one you saw on the pictures a while ago are what we call refugees. They are trying to flee from their home countries to seek asylum in other neighboring countries. Lastly, a migrant is a person who moves from one place to another, especially in order to find work or better living conditions. OFWs are perfect examples of migrants. They would not be immigrants unless they are naturalized in the country where they are working. So again, these are the differences in the meaning of these three words. Now, of course, I would not be showing these pictures for no reason. What do you think is the reason why we look at these pictures? If you're thinking that the concepts in the pictures are related to the two literary pieces that were given as a reading assignment to you, then you are certainly correct. Socioculturally, these two texts present true-to-life conflicts between people. The only difference is that one of them presents characters who remained and bound by curfews, while the other one tells of a persona who tried to escape an armed conflict by being a refugee or being a migrant to another country. We hope that at the end of this live stream session, we will be able to relate and understand the struggles of the psyches embedded in the following literary text. We have The Rhythmic Exercise by Mohamed Maksangi and Immigration Headline by Javier Zamora. To guide us in analyzing these texts, we shall be guided by the literary elements and the context that we have discussed in the previous live stream sessions. Remember that to the understanding of the text, context always matters. It is for this reason that today we aim to hit the following targets which are carried over from the previous sessions. Number 1, examine a literary text through biographical, linguistic, literary, and sociocultural contexts. And number 2, analyze how the different contexts enrich the reader's understanding of the literary text. Grade 12, what are the different contexts that we can use in analyzing and interpreting the text? Can you comment those 4 contexts? Okay, we have biographical, linguistic, literary, and sociocultural contexts. Again, context refers to what surrounds the text, the community around it. Biographical context helps us know if the text has something to do with the life of the writer. By knowing the connection between his life and his work, we can better understand the text and where the text is coming from. On the other hand, our use of the linguistic context is very well evident in how we look at the words, phrases, and sentences that inform us and defend our arguments pertaining to the text. Like, you can say that this text talks about war, but what are your evidences to that claim? Linguistic context can help you with that. Literary context is also important because this context lets us know how to approach a certain text. How you read a poem would be different with how you read a short story. Lastly, sociocultural context or the surrounding issues related to the text, like the biographical context, lets us know where the text is coming from and what the text represents. Let's begin the application of the different contexts by looking first at the elements of fiction embedded in the short story Rhythmic Exercise by Mohamed Maksangi. Again, can you please comment down the 5 literary elements of fiction? Come on, comment them down. We have discussed them for quite some time, so I believe you still remember them. Okay, we have the plot, the setting, characters, point of view, and the theme. There are no other topic that is more important than these elements, class. You know, class, you may see that we're just repeating the lessons, but actually we're not. The previous lessons are necessary to prepare you for reading the text of the 21st century. That is the reason why that's the name of the subject. This is supposed to be a survey of representative texts from the Philippines and from the world. Now, let's begin with the plot of the short story. Why will we start and why should we look at the plot? Why do we analyze the piece by analyzing the plot? Which context informs us that we should look at the plot? Of course, it is the literary context. This context tells us that there is a narrative contained, or this narrative contains a theme that we must uncover. In a nutshell, we can argue that the exposition and the rising action are intertwined at the very first 2 or 3 paragraphs of the story. We'll discuss that part in a little while. For now, let's look at how the exposition was presented in the story. Again, the exposition is the part where the status quo and the characters are presented. Let me read the exposition, or let me show the exposition I wrote based on my reading of the text. Due to the long period of curfew caused by armed conflict, a certain family who has everything they need in the course of the said curfew noticed that each of them begins to gain weight. In order to prevent obesity and depression, they devised various exercises for the family. While the father recommended aerobic exercise, the advice of his son and daughter to do rhythmic exercise gained popularity in the family. The exposition presents the setting, right? How does this paragraph present the setting? Let us highlight the terms that present the setting of the story. The story definitely presents curfew, armed conflict, privilege, issue of obesity and depression, and the thought of exercise as descriptions of the status quo or the current condition. I will not say that this is the condition before the conflict or the rising action because this status quo presents the conflict in itself. Just stay put and we will prove that point later. For now, let us prove the points we have for the setting through the linguistic context or the words, phrases, or sentences coming from the text. Let us begin with the long period of curfew. Why did we say that at the beginning of the story, the characters had been experiencing long periods of curfew? Let us read the first paragraph, then comment the word, phrases, or sentences that prove the idea that this curfew is indeed a long one. Let's read them, or let's read this part. A few days after the sunset to sunrise curfew went into effect, the members of this jolly family began to feel run down. Their apartment had all the needed emergency supplies, food, water, first aid kit, in addition to entertainment options such as reading materials, television, and video programs, and the internet, not to mention a landline and a personal cell phone for each. Still, something kept irking them and leading them to feel that they were leading a prison life. Now, based on this paragraph, which words, phrases, or sentences inform us that the curfew is indeed long? Comment your answers. I'm going to wait for your answers, class. Okay. First, we have the phrase, sunset to sunrise curfew. Next, the text also has the sentence, still something kept irking them and leading them to feel that they have or they were leading a prison life. One would not look at curfew as an imprisonment if that curfew had not been so long, right? You can just imagine the sunset to sunrise curfew. It means that you won't have the slightest chance of seeing your crush outside. How about in the next paragraph? What prepositional phrase here in this paragraph informs us of the long period of curfew? Let's read. They felt as if they were living in a rather spacious dungeon, yet a dungeon all the same. Inside that dungeon, in a matter of days, they began to notice that their weight was steadily increasing. Their bodies grew heavier as time weighed down on them. None of the entertainment options could lighten them up. Besides, the sounds of gunshots and explosions were within earshot, inviting gory images of sniper operations and assassinations. They intimidated each other in a variety of ways. Their fear of unconsciously slipping from despondency to despair. Now, which prepositional phrase in this paragraph is responsible for making us think that the curfew is indeed a lengthy one? Comment your answers. Alright, that single prepositional phrase, in a matter of days, a curfew imposed in a matter of days, of course, would not be the same curfew imposed only for a week. This phrase tells us of the lengthy periods of curfew. Again, that prepositional phrase is in a matter of days. Again, here are the words, phrases, and sentences, all part of the linguistic context that prove our reading that indeed there was a long curfew. Note that this process is only done for one part of the setting. Let's see the other claims on the setting. We also said that there was an armed conflict. Where is this evidence? Where in the first two paragraphs? Let's see them again. Okay, class, we read this paragraph or this part silently, then comment the words, phrases, or sentences that tell something about armed conflict. Again, you need to look for the words, phrases, and sentences about armed conflict. Go ahead. Okay. What have you seen as an evidence? Yeah, you're correct. The evidence to armed conflict is not yet here. Let's see the next paragraph. Let's see if it's there. Again, we read this silently, then comment the words, phrases, or sentences that tell something about armed conflict. What are your answers? If you answered the highlighted words that you can see on the screen right now, then you got this right. Take a look again. Armed conflict. Armed conflict was shown by the following phrases. The sound of gunshots, explosions were within earshot, sniper operations, and assassinations. Let's see the next one. This time, let's prove that this family is a privileged one, or one who has everything they need during this curfew. Look and reread the paragraph again. Okay, what words prove that this family is a privileged family? Comment your answers. There are 3 sentences, class, in this paragraph. Which sentence contains the information we're looking for? Correct. It's the second sentence, the one highlighted as violet. How about in the second paragraph? Again, we read the second paragraph, then comment the number of sentence that proves that this family is indeed a privileged one. Comment your answers. Alright, if your answer is consistent with the highlighted sentences or parts, then you got this right again. Good job. The family's privilege is seen in their ability to rent an apartment, their access to supplies, entertainment, and not only telephone connectivity but also internet connection. Weight gain, class, is also a manifestation of privilege because, of course, what makes you fat? Okay, what makes you fat are the food that you eat. And how can you buy food without money? Discontentment is, I think, the one that proves that they don't see how privileged they are. When the narrator said none of the entertainment options could lighten them up, it seems that they don't realize that they were blessed enough that they have those things, unlike other people who don't have the capacity to look for entertainment. Let's have the next one. Aside from the previous things we have already said regarding the setting of the story, we also read that in their current situation, or we also read that their current situation permits obesity and depression. Sigaw na madla, where in the text can you see that? Where in the text can you see obesity and depression? Okay, you know the drill. We read this, then comment the portion where obesity and depression were written. Do we have these information here in this paragraph? Correct. This paragraph has no details on that. Let's see the next paragraph. Comment the portion where obesity and depression were written. Okay. If your answers are the same with the ones highlighted, then you are certainly a good user of the linguistic context to prove claims, points, and arguments. The sentences that tell us about the increasing weight, getting heavier as time weighed down on them, and slipping from despondency to despair all contribute to the idea that indeed the family is getting obese and depressed. Let's have the last one. We said in this exposition that they have devised various forms of exercise. Let's see the evidence, shall we? Okay. Which words, phrases, and or sentences can be used as evidences to the claim in the exposition class? I know you have not seen evidence in this or here in this first paragraph. So let's see the next one. Reread this one. Have you seen any evidence? Evidence regarding the pursuance of the exercise in order to avoid obesity? No? Let's look at the third paragraph. It means to say that the first and the second paragraphs do not show those pieces of information we're looking for. Okay, so let me read this for you. The family members made various suggestions on how to prevent failing or falling prey to obesity and the abyss of depression. From among these, the father's suggestion was the winner. An athlete in his youth, their father recommended that they begin a regimen of aerobic exercises, which can also be a good exercise for seniors wherever and whenever possible. Each of them began implementing the idea in their own fashion. Okay, class, which part tells us that they devised exercises to prevent obesity? Okay, if your answer is the same with this, the one that you can see on the screen right now, then you got this right again. How about in this part? Do we see any word or words pertaining to the promotion of an exercise? Look at this part. There you have the word rhythmic exercise, class. The story did not only say that they devised an exercise, they actually tried various forms of exercise until they settled with rhythmic exercise, a form of exercise accompanied by music. Looking back at what we just did, you'll see that linguistic context is indeed important to understand the literary piece. Class, the thoughts on this exposition may have come naturally to you. It must have come naturally to you. But as a literature student, no part of the text must be left unturned. Again, no part of the text must be left unturned. And you use that in order to do your analysis. Okay, so if you're not going to present to us evidences to your claim, then your thoughts would be just hearsay. Okay, a while ago, we said that the exposition gives us both the exposition and the rising action. Now, what are our evidences to that? Given that the setting tells us about the place and the time of armed conflict in a particular place and the problem on the impending obesity or depression as effects of long-standing curfews, where can we see the conflict? What is the main conflict of the story? To do that, we will be using our understanding of the literary context. Again, based on our previous discussions, there may be minor conflicts leading to the main or central conflict. In the case of the story, there is also a minor and a central conflict. The central conflict, just like what I've said, was already embedded in the exposition. If we are to look at the story again, there are only two possible conflicts. The two that you can see on the screen. Problem of impending obesity or depression and armed conflict. To know which between the two is the central conflict, let's answer this question. Would this family experience curfew if there was no armed conflict? Now, I think you know the answer, but to make this even more clear, let's identify which of the following came first. Which of the three do you think happened first? Obesity, curfew, or armed conflict? In this way, we'd know which is the true conflict. Or if obesity is the central and true conflict here, then the story should have stopped the moment they found a way to solve it. But you know that the story did not end there. Now, what's your answer? Which came first? Alright. Armed conflict was the cause for the curfew, which in turn caused obesity or depression. Therefore, the conflict is character versus institutions perpetuating armed conflict. It was armed conflict that made us think of how the story will end. Again, in the status quo or the current setting of the characters, the conflict or rising action has already been evident. Now, let's look at the characters, class. Let's try to characterize the characters by again using linguistic context. Here we can see that the father was the first one who thought of the idea of exercise as a way to fight obesity. I think that those ideas are quite evident already in this part of the text. In this part, however, we knew that it was the son and daughter in the story who proposed rhythmic exercise, and that there is also a mother to the family. The existence of the words father, mother, son, and daughter in the story inform us that the family are the central characters of the story. What kind of family was evident in this story? Is it nuclear or extended family? Okay, it's a nuclear family or a family group consisting only of two parents and their children. A while ago, we have already proved that this family is a privileged one because of this part of the story which tells how blessed they are to have both their needs and wants at home during the curfew. Now, let's see the succeeding parts of the story. Let's have the climax or the most exciting part of the story. To see this, let's read this part of the story. In no time, the whole household began to seem as if they were, or as if were dancing. All the time, above the din of explosions, sniper shots, depressing news, and increasing curfew hours. The transformation in the fourth floor apartment likely came under the destiny of one of the opposite buildings somehow. It is not clear how, because even from the closest opposite window, one could not make out what was happening behind the glass with the naked eye. Clearly, a naked eye was not the one that aimed a weapon at a specific corner of the glass and sent the probing bullets to lodge in the heart of the television screen the mother was watching while exercising. Class, the climax should inform us of what happened to the family after a certain action was done. We are sure that at this point, this was the conflict. With one bullet, the sniper filled all the music in the chests of the 5 family members. The climax has been presented. The bullet, which is again part of the conflict, made them stop, if not stifle, from doing the rhythmic exercise. As for the denouement, the bullet shocked and made the family stop from doing rhythmic exercise. And this is how the story ended. Before we proceed to the reason why this story was entitled Rhythmic Exercise, let us identify the point of view of the story. Again, we will be using linguistic context to know this. Look at this paragraph, class, the one that you can see now. By the way, this is the ending of the story. What pronouns were used in this part of the story? Again, what pronouns were used? Was the narrator aware of everything in the story? Of every point in the story? Is it a yes or a no? Looking at the highlighted words, class, the pronouns used were in third person. This means that the point of view is in third person, and because the narrator knows the actions and thoughts including what's happening outside the apartment of the family, this point of view is in omniscient form. To identify the theme, we need to answer this question, class. Why was the short story entitled Rhythmic Exercise? This question can also be answered by another question, and that is, what does this rhythmic exercise symbolize? To know what it symbolizes, you need to first know what paved the way for the conduct of rhythmic exercises in the context of the story. Remember that they did the exercise not only because they're becoming obese, but because they feel the need to do something else to kill the boredom. And mind you, they did this in the middle of a very serious armed conflict just outside their home. Look at the contrasting images here. Let me read this for you. In no time, the whole household began to seem as if we're dancing. All the time, above the din of explosions, sniper shots, depressing news, and increasing curfew hours. They were dancing while shots are fired outside. By doing the exercise, they seem to escape reality outside. But then, somebody from the outside, somebody from reality, returned them to reality. Rhythmic exercise symbolizes escape from reality. From this, we can write the theme that no matter how much you escape, reality follows you. Reality always strikes. What reality is talked about here? To better know about the armed conflict presented in the story, we need to look at the extra-linguistic context, like the biographical and the socio-cultural context. The author Mohammed Maksangi class was born in 1915 in the town of Mansoura in the Delta of Egypt. He studied to become a doctor and later specialized in psychology and alternative medicine in the Ukrainian capital, Kiev. Having practiced as a doctor for some years, he turned to journalism and writing and spent time in Kuwait working on the magazine Al Arabi. What we have to note in this biography here is that he is an Egyptian. Number one, he's an Egyptian, and that number two, he wrote this story in 2015. So definitely something happened during that time in Egypt that probably inspired him to write this piece. True enough, class, we found that from 2011 to 2014, serious uprisings have dominated the socio-cultural landscape of Egypt. Most causes of the 11 Egyptian revolution or uprising against Mubarak, President Mubarak during that time, also existed in 1952, where the free officers ousted King Farouk, who is just in power because of inherited power, corruption, underdevelopment, unemployment, unfair distribution of wealth, and the presence of Israel. In 2013, taxes are into position ready to block the roads. Taxis are charging double to whiz people home on time, and shops and restaurants are closed or were closed. Cairo's curfew has been in place since the 14th of August 2013. Okay, this curfew was imposed after the massacre of up to 1,000 supporters of the ousted President Mohamed Morsi unleashed a wave of violence across the country. So that was actually the socio-cultural setting or context why there is a curfew in the story. Based on this part, we know that the armed conflict in rhythmic exercise was inspired by a true conflict that led to the imposition of long periods of curfew to protect citizens from uprisings. No matter how these Egyptians escaped the reality, however, they would always be haunted by conflicts caused by problems in their political, economic, and social institutions. Thanks to these contexts, we're able not only to provide evidences to our claims, but also to enrich and extend our understanding of the literary text. Now, let us proceed with Immigration Headline by Javier Zamora. From people who chose to stay, let's see a persona who chose to go because of conflicts between people. We shall be using, again, our understanding of the literary elements, this time pertaining to poetry, to understand the piece. Let us start with the persona of the poem. After reading, we can make these claims about the persona. Let's see the claims for the persona or about the persona. We can say that he or she is someone who narrates his experiences as a migrant from one place to another, and somebody who intends to tell other people of the experiences of a refugee or of a migrant. To prove that we are correct, we will use the linguistic and literary context of the text. Let me ask Javier Zamora himself to read this part of the poem.
Immigration Headline. Byline. Northern Triangle. First, I lived near mud. There, I carved some things. Then, I found a well. Yo soy un bicho migrante. I had to climb trees, find mollusks, made a knife to eat them raw. Later, I worried about firewood, pots to cook. I asked, where did my parents go? Where? There? I walked to another tree, another shore. Where are they now? I carved more. My face, my parents, and alligators. Yo soy un bicho migrante.
Based on what you saw and heard at this point, would you agree with our claims about the persona? Again, we said that the persona is someone who narrates his experiences as a migrant from one place to another. How did we know this? Using linguistic context or the words in the text, we would be able to defend our claim. First, look at the title, Immigration Headline. Based on the title alone, you'll know that this is about an immigrant, a migrant, or a refugee, or any outsider in a certain country. Also, we know that this is a narration because the tense used here is past tense. Commonly, a person who talks of his story uses past tense because the events are already done in the past. We also argue that this is an account of his personal experiences because he used first-person personal pronouns. Lastly, looking at the words, you'll see that cohesive devices that maintain a chronological sequence like first and then are or were evident in this part of the poem, thereby supporting our idea that this poem talks of a persona who narrates not only any other story, but his own story as a migrant or as a refugee. With that, class, we have verified our first claim about the persona. Let's verify our second claim, shall we? This time, we'll use literary context to prove our second point. Again, we said that the persona is someone who intends to tell other people of the experiences of a refugee or of a migrant. His intention as the persona is to tell because, first, in terms of the form of the poem, it is in the form of a news article. There's a headline, class, there's a byline, and of course, the body of the news article taken out of a newspaper. News articles narrate an important story. This poem is a narration of an important story. In this case, the story of a migrant. We can also prove that this could be anyone because of the unnamed byline in the poem. This means to say that this could be anyone who was seen or has been a migrant before. Again, we were able to prove that our point or claim is true through the context that we have. Moreover, class, we can say that the persona addresses this poem to any form of a news article. A news article is intended for everyone who reads it, right? So this poem is also for those who will read it. Note that we did not just assume that particular point. We thought of that point because of the form of the poem. So definitely our point is informed of a particular point in the literary piece. Now, what do you think is the theme of the poem? I would leave the answer to you. We read the poem and create your theme. During your follow-up discussion, let your subject teacher hear your thoughts. To better appreciate this poem about migrants, immigrants, and also refugees, let's take a look at the biographical and sociocultural context of the poem. Here we have Javier Zamora, the writer of the poem that you have just read. He was born in La Herradura, El Salvador in 1990. His father fled El Salvador when he was a year old, and his mother when he was about to turn 5. Both parents' migration were caused by the US-funded Salvadorian Civil War from 1980 to 1992. In 1999, Javier migrated through Guatemala, Mexico, and eventually to the Sonoran Desert. After a coyote abandoned his group in Oaxaca, Javier managed to make it to Arizona with the aid of other migrants. Javier currently lives in Harlem, New York, where he's working on a memoir and his second collection of poems, which address the current immigration crisis. Alright, I think that based on these information, you would see what inspired the author to write a poem about migrants. It seems that in the poem, he is actually narrating how he escaped his own country and went as a refugee or migrants to neighboring countries. Why did he migrate to another country? Looking at the sociocultural context of the poem, we can see that El Salvador, the native land of the writer, faced a civil war again in 1979 to 1992. This was already discussed in the biographical context. The Salvadorian Civil War was fought between the military-led junta government of El Salvador and the Farabundo Marti Nacional Liberation Front, or FMLN, a coalition or organization of left-wing groups. A coup on October 15, 1979 was followed by killings of anti-coup protesters by the government and of anti-disorder protesters by the guerrillas, and is widely seen as a start of civil war. Until now, class, there are still migrants or refugees around the world. They were displaced individuals looking for asylum. It's either that their former country or their native land is experiencing civil war or any kind of situation or uprising. They're looking for a safe place for them to live. This is true in the infographic that you can see on the screen. Again, class, literature presents the realities of life, and a good literature has the ability to record significant human experiences such as these. We are, however, aided by context in order for us to understand where the context or where the text is coming from. I hope that these two literary pieces opened your eyes to one of the many issues of the world. After all, that's the aim of literature, to liberate the mind. In our next session class, we shall sail to another topic, which would be the various canonical literary works and writers around the world. For now, be ready for our next subject or for your next subject and for the follow-up discussion on the next learning day. Again, this is Jasper Angeles, your live stream teacher. See you next time!